So with the recording started, you are in free survey tools. I'm Daniel Cornwall, the Internet and Technology Consultant with the Alaska State Library, and I'll be your guide for this session. I like to start with intro and ground rules, and the intro is just to say that this session is being recorded. I would like you to ask questions at any point in our presentation. If I'm about to get to them soon, I will say so. Otherwise, we'll probably go ahead and answer them right at the point of need. If, like Katie, you need to step away for a bit, certainly feel free to do that. And then finally, the main thing that I'd really hope that you do is that after the webinar ends, I'd like you to go back to your desk. Well, actually, you're probably at your desk, and practice one thing that you've learned today, and that'll help make things sink in a lot easier. And since both of the major things we'll be talking about today are free, there's no expense, and they should be relatively connectivity light, and I would really enjoy your feedback about whether that turns out to be true. But do these sound like reasonable ground rules to you? Okay, thank you. So, the other thing that I'd like before we get fully started is if you could just type in the type of organization that you're calling in from today. And I've got a list there. Great to have a museum. Okay. Wow, looks like you've got really good card coverage, Katie. And looks like Paula and Katie are typing things in. And I'm just going to make sure that my room door is really well closed because I keep hearing people going by. Be right back. Okay, thank you for that. And okay, well, certainly being a free-floating librarian is perfectly fine to be in this workshop. So now what I hope that you will know after today, we will very briefly cover what I call non-traditional uses for survey tools, because both of the tools that we're going to look at a bit in depth don't have to be surveys. They can be basically any time that you need an online form, one of these survey tools might be helpful. We're going to look at SurveyMonkey and Google Forms in particular, because they seem to have a good combination of a decent set of free features and combined with not being overwhelming on bandwidth, although both have features that can make them bandwidth intensive as you want them to be. So, why would you want to do online surveys to begin with? I mean, I'm assuming you want to or you wouldn't be here. But aside from user surveys, I wanted to suggest a number of different ideas for forms. Basically, if it can be filled out on paper, it can be filled out online. And other than your highest confidential type forms, maybe you don't want to do those online, but for almost anything else, you might want to consider doing an online tool. Like you could probably whip up a nice little reference form, say, that the type of question that you get, or internet attendance if you're not taking names. But it's got a lot of flexibility. And then one example of a tool that Diane might actually be familiar with, and perhaps have some feedback about is the Alaska State Museums a couple of years ago transitioned their online application process for their grants into SurveyMonkey. So it's not, so basically with the survey tools that we're talking about today, not only do you get aggregate results, but they also save the individual responses. And because they save the individual responses, they're good for things like applications. So that's just a word that you don't have to be limited just to surveys. Hang on one moment. Now, at the place where at the page that you entered the webinar today, there was a link to a class handout. And if you download that link, and if you haven't yet, I hope you will right after the end of the webinar. But it's got some links to articles that review a number of different free survey tools. Now, I've got SurveyMonkey and Google Forms in really large font because those are the two that aside from being relatively light on bandwidth and having a good feature set for free, I am so sorry to have lost my train of thought. But basically, we only had time to go into depth with a couple of these tools. But the handout that I have lists out articles that review several other tools. So if at the end of this you get to the end and say that neither SurveyMonkey or Google Forms is exactly what you're looking for, then I'd encourage you to look through the review articles and see if there's something else that fits you better. If you've got the bandwidth for it, or more importantly, if your users have the bandwidth for it, you might consider this type form. It's got some very aesthetically pleasing looking surveys and forms, but it seems like unnecessary graphics in bandwidth-starved places. So let's go ahead and jump into SurveyMonkey. And SurveyMonkey is probably one of the largest providers of online surveys. They have a paid service, which they call Pro, but they do have a free service. And if you expect low levels of responses, specifically under 50 responses per survey, no, under 100 responses per survey, this is a really easy service to just get right up and running. I mean, within a few minutes after logging in, I think that you'd be able to put together a survey. And its address is www.surveymonkey.com, but that address is also going to be in the handout that if you don't already have, you're going to download it right after right at the end of the webinar. So I find it extremely easy to use. There aren't many organizations that block it with their web filters. You have options of logging in. You can set up a standalone account, or if you're already a Google or Facebook user, you can use that account to log in. In an institutional context, I would suggest maybe if your institution has a Google account, I'd use that one. Otherwise, I'd set up a separate account. The Facebook option probably isn't as helpful to institutions. Now, SurveyMonkey and Google Forms, for that matter, are pretty mobile friendly. And what I mean by that is that if you have your users access the survey on a smartphone or tablet, and you can see the questions pretty easily. You can touch the answers. It's not a big deal unless you're having a lot of essay questions. Now those are the pluses. The minuses is that in SurveyMonkey, in the free version, you can have no more than 10 questions per survey. Now this could be a hidden benefit because research has shown that the shorter the survey, the more likely it is people are to answer it. Something that might be more of a problem is that you can only get 100 responses per survey. And there's a lot of towns in Alaska where this isn't going to be a problem, but for the larger markets, this could be an issue. And then finally, limited customization. And what I mean by that most specifically is that in the free version, you're going to be stuck with having the SurveyMonkey logo on each and every survey that you have. Any questions about the pros and cons of SurveyMonkey before I get into how you'd actually write a survey? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. So for SurveyMonkey and for Google Forms, we're going to go through creating a survey, collecting answers from a survey, and getting results from a survey. So here we're in our creation phase. Once you log in with however you decide to set up your account, you're going to get a screen like this. This is my personal one through Facebook. I found it very useful to use for the ACLA Juneau chapter, which I was chair of for several years, and for some continuing ed classes I was taking. They were both situations where I wasn't expecting more than 100 responses, and so it worked very well for me. So you have the big green Create Survey button, and once you press that, you get to the Create Survey page. And you have options of creating a new survey, copy an existing survey. If you intend to survey your user base every year, maybe you copy last year's survey and update the questions a little bit. If you're really hardcore, you can use an expert survey template. Or you can choose a category. There's different categories of surveys that offer different questions. And I usually just simply create a new survey. And once you do that, you get a very easy layout that starts off with a banner. And you can change the color of this. You can't change anything else about it in the free version. You can actually add text to the page, like a description of what the survey is supposed to be about. And then this is a field where you'd add a question. And let's go ahead and do that. Once you start popping up a question, its default is a multiple choice, but you can also do rankings. You can do a comment essay. You can do ratings. You can pull what are called demographic questions. And I'd just encourage you, if you go into SurveyMonkey, to click on the different types of questions in this drop-down box and see what options they give you. Now, I've pre-filled out a survey so we don't have to thrash around with it. So I have the question text, and I chose how often did you come to the library in the last 12 months. And then you list some answer choices. And then that's pretty much it. You click on the Save and Close button down here, and you're able to add another question, or you could just go with the one survey question. And it's really just push buttons, type questions, provide responses, and so on and so forth. Once you're done with a SurveyMonkey survey, you have to set up what's called a collector. And I should have said the first place that you start out in a survey is this Design Survey tab. And now that we're actually collecting responses, we're in the Collect Responses tab. And the main one that I would suggest, there's there's 3 ways that you can do it. You can do well, there's more than this. Oh, and in addition to the web link that I'm going to talk at more length, there's also enter survey results manually, and that'll be important if you are surveying a use of visitors, patrons, whatever, that don't have their own internet access. But for now, we'll assume that people can get to the web either on their own or in your library. And you can do it through a web link collector. You can post it to your Facebook page. If you were so inclined, you could actually embed the survey in your web page so that people wouldn't have to go away to SurveyMonkey to take your survey. They would be looking at a page that appeared to be mostly like your website, only it would have a survey embedded into it. So let's go with the web link collector. I think that's the most popular one. It's certainly the one that we use most often at the State Library. And you have some options. An important one is responses by computer. I would strongly recommend, especially if you're going to run this survey on computers in your library, that you choose allow multiple responses from one computer. The only time that you might want to use the only allow one response per computer is if you were using it as a voting tool, say. But it gives you a website and a web link. And now what I'd actually like to do, just so you can get some sense of what it might be for your visitors to take the survey, is that I'm going to open up what's called a web tour window and drop this survey into it. I added a few more questions. And it's not copying, it didn't copy the way that I was expecting it to. You come back. Okay, now hopefully in just a moment or so, you should see a web page with our survey. And this worked great in testing yesterday. Is anyone currently seeing a survey? If you could just type into chat whether you're seeing or not. No? Okay. Okay, it just popped in for me. And how about now? One of the best practices in distance education is to not spend the entire time just talking at people, but providing some routes of interactivity. And that was the hope with this one. I'll tell you what, if you feel comfortable doing so, I'm going to paste the link into the chat box. And if you could click on that and take the survey, and then you might have to look for a little purple button at the bottom of your monitor to make sure that you get back into Blackboard. And if you could let me know if you can't make it into the survey, or when you finish the survey, come back and let me know that you finished it. And I'm just going to mic off here for a moment. Okay, so maybe this wasn't such a great idea. Is there anyone out there who actually did get to the survey? Okay, good. I'll go ahead and thank you, Katie. So I'll just give another minute. I'll turn off the web tour, and then we'll go into results. And when I do a similar thing for Google, I'll go ahead and send the link to chat. Okay, great. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift to application sharing, and I will show you my web browser where I've got SurveyMonkey open. And my computer's feeling a little bit sluggish. Okay. And now I think that you ought to be seeing my my SurveyMonkey screen. Is that correct? Okay. So now at the top of the list of my surveys is my How Do You Use the Library? And got the title. Under responses, I've got 5 responses. And then the actions. And the little thing with the pencil is designing your survey. The people gathered together are collecting surveys. And as you might imagine, the analyzing results is the graphical bar. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And for each question, for each of the multiple choice questions, you're presented with bar graphs and then a table. And let me move things around a bit. So it looks like we're a mix of heavy users and occasional users. And I note in passing that the library brand is most strongly established with books. Although this just Hangout, I see some third space stuff happening and attending a program. And then that's followed by a table as well. And then this is the recommendation. Would you recommend the library or not? I'm going to go ahead and click on comments. And so you can see the open-ended responses that patrons had. Now, each of these questions, you'll notice has an export bar. Part of this is SurveyMonkey's marketing, because if we actually go ahead and click on export and then question summary data, it'll tell us that we need to upgrade. So I'll go ahead and say no thanks. And so if you wanted to get, let me bring that back. So if you want to get your results out of the free version of SurveyMonkey, unfortunately, the main thing that you'd probably want to do is you could copy and paste the tables into Excel maybe, or what I've sometimes found myself doing for the Acla-Juno chapter was simply printing things out and then scanning them into PDF. Most browsers now will let you print to a PDF document as well. This and the limit of responses are probably the 2 biggest problems that I have with SurveyMonkey. Yes, Katie, now that I see the dialog box, you can certainly use the snipping tool to capture picture, and that would be a great way of capturing the graphs especially. So that's a smart way to do things. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my sharing of SurveyMonkey for now and go back to my presentation. Now, let's say that you want to make the results of this survey public. And that is something very easy to do, and you can even do it in the free version, which is exciting. So basically, at that analyzing screen that we were just at, you would want to click up at the top on Share All, and then it gives you Share Data, and it gives you 4 options. And it's kind of nice that it shades the 2 paid options in pink, but I went ahead and stuck big red X's on them. The 2 ways that you can share data is you can make it completely public, which means that SurveyMonkey will allow your survey to be indexed by search engines and potentially findable that way. Or anyone with the link. Let's say that you just wanted to put a link to the survey results on your web page. You'd do anyone with the link and then embed that into your web page. But it's a very simple way to do it. And then once you do, I did this public, it gives you a chance to change the title of the page. Like if you had the survey titled something different internally, you can give it a different public name, a little description. And then this part's important. You have a choice of including the open-ended responses, which I strongly encourage if you have any questions with comments at all. It also allows you, if you want, to share the individual responses, which I never would personally, even if I'm not asking for their names. I mean, I'd share individual responses with staff who needed to have them, but my philosophy is anyone else should just get the summary. So once you do that, you're given a another URL, and you get a page that only gives you the results. It doesn't give any links back to any account-specific information. So that could be a good way to gather some information you want to have public and then share that out. So that's what I have on SurveyMonkey. Do people have questions about anything before we move on to Google Forms? With SurveyMonkey, I have found it to be operating pretty much the same across all browsers. I actually haven't had a chance to test a Google Forms survey in anything but Chrome, which you would hope it would work in Chrome since they're both Google products. My expectation is that it would be pretty much the same unless we're talking about really old Internet Explorer browsers. But sensible question, Katie. And a follow-up? Oh, okay. And I'll try and make this a bit faster since I see we're like at 20 to 2. So if you've never signed into Google Forms before, you'll get a splash screen like this. If you actually already have a Google account, you'll be taken right into creating a new survey. So in some ways, this is a really great tool. You don't have, it's a completely free product. They don't even have a paid version, at least not yet. No limits on questions or responses. You can do a lot of customizing of the look of the survey or form if it's really important to match your library or city's library, museums, or city's branding. It's also mobile friendly, like SurveyMonkey was. You can definitely answer a survey on a phone, And something we're going to see a demonstration of. This has skip logic, because we all know of surveys where not every question pertains to everyone. In SurveyMonkey, you have to ask everyone everything in the free version. But in Google Forms, you can use questions to direct people to different places, and I will show you an example of that. The two cons, and there's actually a third that's not on this form. There are some organizations that block everything associated with Google Drive, including Google Forms, on the grounds that it is network storage. And so organizations that deal in a lot of highly personal information will sometimes block access to Google Forms. State of Alaska is actually one of those organizations. I have access to Google Forms because I did an online storage waiver and then a waiver specifically for Google Forms on the grounds that tons and tons of libraries and museums were using Google Forms for their surveys, and we needed to be able to actually access them. I'm hoping it's not a lot of organizations that block forms in this way, but some do. And then, to me, it seems like you want to go through more effort at going through their tutorials and things, because I did not find Google Forms as intuitive as SurveyMonkey. But if you want to have more than 100 people respond to your survey, or you need to have more than 10 questions, you're going to want to use Google Forms. So, as I said, if you're already, and the third con, as it were, is that all of the surveys are tied, all of the surveys are tied to one specific Google account. So if you're going to go through the Google Forms route, I would highly, highly recommend having a general Google Library account for your institution, because otherwise when the volunteer who does all of the surveys leaves, you'll lose access to those surveys. So once you have that nice general institution account, you'll sign in and you'll be dropped directly into the untitled form, untitled survey. And the first box you'll see are related to the survey form as a whole. And the one option I'd strongly suggest that you enable is the show progress at the bottom of form pages. Just because generally speaking, when people have a sense of progress, they're more likely to complete a survey. Then you have the page level, and then you have the question level. And again, like other survey tools, the default for Google Forms is multiple choice, but there are these other question types, which I'll let you look at really quickly. Once you have questions written, you can move them around. Sometimes it's not always obvious how to make things move and stay. I had some quality time watching different questions slide around onto pages I didn't mean to slide around to them. But if you put in enough effort into it, you can get pretty precise, and you can change colors and backgrounds if you want. And here is where I set up what I called the skip logic. I wanted kind of a parallelism between SurveyMonkey and Google Forms, so we did the how do you use your library question again. Now notice what's a little bit different here. I've enabled go to page based on answer, meaning that I can take an answer and send it to a different destination from others. And so what I chose to do is that if someone answered that they have not come to the library within the last 12 months, I'm sending them to a special page, because while they may have good feedback about the library in general, if I'm analyzing what people are finding interesting about what we're doing now, people like this aren't going to be that useful to the survey. And also I needed to develop some skip logic. So let me go ahead and drop in the Google survey link. And this one, I'd actually like you to go through twice pretty quickly. And I'd like you to start out as somebody who hasn't been to the library in a year. Sad thought as it is for us all. And then finish that, and then go through the survey again. And while you're doing that with the link in chat, I will advance the slides and mic off for a little bit. And just let me know when you've submitted the survey. Okay, thank you, Katie. Thanks, Paula. Okay. Thanks, Dan. Sounds like you might be finishing up. But did you notice how the skip logic worked? It skipped you over a whole bunch of questions that, well, in a real survey, it would skip you over a bunch of questions that you didn't necessarily need to answer. Another place that it might be helpful is if you were surveying people based on whether they were youth and above 13 because of federal law. If you were surveying teens and adults, maybe you want to have one set of questions for teens, another set for adults. It just allows you to make different choices. Maybe if you had people who were very fond of your large print collection, if they answered that they enjoyed the large print collection, then they'd be taken to some follow-up questions that not everyone else would go to. Okay, so going to the responses, and in the interest of time, I won't do a live version. In the view of your form, you have one tab that's marked Responses, and then you'd click on Responses, and then you would get charts and tables, just like in SurveyMonkey. If you click on this Publish Analytics here, that'll actually create a public page for this material. And that's one of the two ways that you can share results from Google Forms. If you want to share it out to the world, just a summary, you can click on that Publish Analytics. There's a spot at the bottom of the form that says let people who submit surveys see other results. The other way, if you go internally, is more than one person can work on a survey. So I guess you wouldn't necessarily lose access to all of your surveys if the main person with the account walked away. But if you added other people as collaborators, but I still recommend an institution level account for this. Once you go to File, Add Collaborators, you get a place where you can invite more people. Just type in their emails and they'll get an invitation. They will be editors of the survey, so they would be able to both view results that you're not necessarily publishing to the public, and they can also change questions. So they ought to be trusted people. And here's what I mentioned about publishing publicly. at the bottom of your survey, publish and show a public link to form results. Now, one thing that kind of freaked me out when I first saw this feature is that when I was signed into Google as the editor of this survey, I not only saw the page of summary responses, which I wanted the world to see, but I could also access the individual responses from the supposedly public page. And that was rather disturbing as somebody committed to privacy. But it turns out it was only showing me that because I was logged into Google as the editor. I logged out of Google, went back to the page, and all it would show me was the summary. So this is a perfectly safe way of sharing the results of your survey with the world at large if you'd like to do that. Questions about Google Forms. I only have a couple more slides left, or not nearly as many, and they'll go quicker. And I should also say that in the handout I keep chirping about, there's not only links to the two different services, but I also link to the tutorial files as well. And I'd strongly suggest looking at both of them. And it looks like there might be something coming in from Paula. Is there a time limit for people to take the surveys? No and yes. The default is no, but in SurveyMonkey you can, at least in the paid, in SurveyMonkey you should be able to set an end date for the survey. I think that's available in the free version. In Google Forms, you can't set in advance a time limit, but what you can do is you can turn on and off collecting surveys. And that, let me go back one or two slides. Okay. If you go under responses, there will be a little toggle for accepting responses, and if you take off the check mark, people will get something like, thank you for your interest in this survey, but we're not taking responses anymore. So you can put a date on your calendar, whether that's paper or electronic, and then go into Google and click on the Stop Accepting Responses. But good question, because often we do want time-limited surveys and don't want people adding stuff afterwards. Any other questions about Google Forms before we move on to our last couple bits? Okay, hearing none. So why choose one of these over another? And these are mostly the reasons that I already mentioned on SurveyMonkey. And the short answer is if you have short surveys with fewer than 100 responses expected, and you want something that you can set up the same afternoon, you ought to use SurveyMonkey. If you're expecting more than 100 responses, or you need to be able to download your results into a spreadsheet, or if you're already a heavy consumer of Google Apps anyway, I'd strongly encourage you to go straight to Google Forms. Now, let's say that you live in a community where the library or other organization is the only source of community internet. They're not going to be taking your online surveys at home. But there's a couple of ways that you could go. One is that you could alter your public internet computers so that the home page is your survey form. So they'd have the option of taking the survey then. You could use paper surveys. I know the workshop said, eliminate paper entirely. But if people didn't otherwise have access, but you didn't want to have to type everything into, do all the charts yourself in Excel, you could do a paper survey and then input them into one of these survey tools, and then you would get all the nice pie and bar charts and tables automatically compiled for you without having to hand tally anything. Now, if you weren't aware of it before, and the one thing I should say before either of these is if you use deep freeze on your public computers, you're going to want to thaw them out first before doing these two options. Excuse me. Because otherwise it won't stay past the time that you power things down. In Internet Explorer, you want to go into the little gear icon in the right-hand corner and choose Internet Options. And then one of the very first options will be the home page. And Diane asks, are either of these available to be used in other languages? And I want to say Google Forms is. If I could actually have you send me an email, and my contact information is on the last slide, I'll find that out. I'll find that out for sure. With SurveyMonkey, the paid version will let you survey folks in other languages. Okay, so going back to Internet Explorer, you just, actually the easiest way once you get to, would be to go to your survey page, then go to the gear icon in the right-hand corner, choose Internet Options, which brings up this box, and then click on Use Current, and that'll reset your home page to your survey page. If you're in Firefox, what you want to do is Firefox in the upper right-hand corner has what we call a hamburger menu, which is 3 horizontal lines. It's a very abstract hamburger. You choose Options from that, and then you click on the General tab, and then it says, when Firefox starts, show my home page, and then underneath it, again, you can click Use Current Page if you've already navigated to your survey page. So that's how you would set up your web browsers to be survey collection tools. Now, the handout that I talked about, did all of you download it already? Okay, hearing from Diane. Okay. I'm going to put this into chat as well. Don't go to it just yet, but I wanted to make sure people had access to it, because in addition to having the links to the survey tools, the links to the tutorials for the survey tools, links to review articles that mention other survey tools, it also has a couple of articles about choosing good survey questions, which I knew I would not have time for in this particular session. So, any questions on anything that we've covered today? And my last bit here is my contact information slide. Still taking questions, but yeah, Diane, if you'd email me at daniel.cornwall@alaska.gov, I'll certainly find out about the language options. And it looks like we might have something coming in from Paula. So I hope that you've gotten a flavor for the free tools that are out there, and how there's relatively there's some relative power with this. And what sort of problems were you thinking of, Paula? The question was, have you had problems with the Excel results? Okay, well, I've worked with SurveyMonkey more than I've worked with Google Forms, and I haven't really had problems with the results downloaded from SurveyMonkey, although that's only available in the paid version. I've played around with the Google Forms spreadsheet somewhat, and it seems okay, but I didn't have very many responses. But if you've run into a similar problem in the future, I would love to see the issues with it. And it looks like we might have a comment or question from Katie. Okay, and thank you for your kind words. That's all the material that I had prepared. Sorry that we went a couple of minutes over. If you have any questions that don't occur to you now, feel free to email or call me. And hopefully within a day or so, we'll have this webinar up so you can have your coworkers view it if you found it useful. Also link to the handout and probably the sample surveys as well. Okay, thank you, Diane. Does anybody have any other comments? And let me just drop in the handout link one more time so that you can go ahead and actually download it if you haven't already. Katie, that is a really good question, which is my way of saying that in the course of researching the different tools, I did not hear audio survey mentioned once. What I would probably think of doing would be a combination of a screen reader so that they would be able to hear the questions, and then a speech-to-text tool, which would help with the comments. I don't know if you could say check 18 to 34, but that is an excellent enough question that I'm writing it down in my notebook. Audio survey is for hearing impaired, because that is definitely an accessibility question. So one of the reasons I like giving these webinars and mini workshops is that I get to learn new things, or at least learn to ask new questions. So anything else before we sign off today? Okay, I see a couple. Thank you, Paula. We certainly will. And waiting for something from Diane. And again, I'm just really tickled that we have a museum person with us today. I sometimes attend the museum web chats that Scott Carley does on behalf of the division, and they're fun to listen to or read sometimes. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.